The smell of fresh coffee and cinnamon rolls filled my kitchen as I watched through the window, hoping to catch a glimpse of my grandchildren playing in their backyard. But the tall fence that Jessica had Marcus install last month blocked my view completely. At 72, I never imagined I'd be standing in my own kitchen, feeling like a stranger in my son's life. The words still echoed in my ears from 3 weeks ago. "You're not welcome here anymore, Diana. Marcus and I have discussed it, and we think it's best if you give us some space." Space. That's what she called cutting me off from my own son and grandchildren. But what Jessica didn't know was that I had been quietly watching, quietly waiting, and quietly preparing for the day when their perfect little world would come crashing down. And when it did, they would discover just how much they actually needed the woman they so easily discarded. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Diana Martinez, and I've lived in the same ranch-style house on Maple Street in Riverside, California for 38 years. I raised my son Marcus here as a single mother after his father walked out when Marcus was just 4 years old. Every scraped knee, every school project, every late-night fever was handled in this house. With these hands. By this heart that never stopped believing my sacrifices would be worth it someday. The avocado tree in my backyard still bears the marks from the tire swing. I hung there when Marcus was 7. The kitchen countertop still has the small burn mark from when he tried to make me breakfast in bed for Mother's Day when he was 12, and nearly set the house on fire. I worked 2 jobs for most of Marcus's childhood to keep us afloat and make sure he had everything he needed. During the day, I was a medical receptionist at Dr. Henderson's family practice downtown, and 3 nights a week, I cleaned offices in the business district. My hands were always rough from the cleaning chemicals, and my feet always ached from standing all day, but I never complained. Not once. When Marcus graduated valedictorian from Riverside High, I was there in the front row, tears streaming down my face, knowing that every sacrifice had been worth it. Marcus earned a full scholarship to UC San Diego, where he studied business and finance. He was brilliant, driven, and everything I had hoped he would become. After graduation, he landed a prestigious job at Morrison Financial Group, one of the largest investment firms in Southern California. By 28, he was making more money than I had ever dreamed possible. That's when he met Jessica at some corporate networking event in Los Angeles. Jessica Palmer came from old money, the kind of family that had trust funds and country club memberships passed down through generations. Her father owned a chain of luxury car dealerships throughout California, and her mother was on the board of several high-end charities. Jessica was beautiful, educated, and sophisticated in ways that made me feel small and inadequate from the moment Marcus brought her home to meet me. She had this way of looking at my house, my furniture, my simple meals, as if she was observing specimens in a museum of middle-class mediocrity. I remember the first time I made dinner for them, 3 years ago. I spent all day preparing Marcus's favorite meal, the same pot roast with mashed potatoes and green beans that he used to devour as a teenager. I set the table with my best dishes, the ones I had saved for special occasions, and waited nervously for their approval. Jessica picked at her food, made polite comments about how homey everything was, and then suggested they should probably leave early because they had dinner plans with her parents the next day. Marcus, who used to ask for seconds and thirds of my pot roast, barely finished half his plate. After they left that night, I found myself washing dishes alone, wondering what I had done wrong. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The house felt emptier than usual, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being measured against some standard I could never meet. Over the following months, their visits became shorter and less frequent. Jessica would check her phone constantly during our conversations, and Marcus would glance at his watch whenever I started sharing stories about his childhood or asking about their plans. When they got engaged 18 months later, I was thrilled and heartbroken at the same time. Thrilled because Marcus seemed happy, but heartbroken because I realized I was losing him to a world I could never be part of. The engagement party was held at the Palmer family's estate in Beverly Hills, a sprawling mansion with manicured gardens, and a staff that served champagne and caviar to 200 guests. I wore the best dress I owned, a navy blue ensemble I had purchased specifically for the occasion, but I still felt like I was wearing a costume to a play I didn't understand. Jessica's friends and family were polite but distant, the kind of politeness that feels like a wall between you and everyone else. They spoke about vacations to Europe, investments in art, and charitable foundations, as if these were normal topics of conversation. I found myself standing alone by the dessert table, watching my son laugh and mingle with people who seemed to speak a language I had never learned. When Marcus introduced me to Jessica's parents, her father shook my hand briefly and immediately turned his attention to someone else. Her mother complimented my dress in a way that somehow made me feel more self-conscious than if she had said nothing at all. The wedding was even more overwhelming. A destination ceremony in Napa Valley at a vineyard that cost more for one day than I made in a year. I offered to help with the expenses, to contribute something meaningful to my son's special day, but Jessica's parents had already handled everything. My role was simply to show up, smile, and try not to embarrass anyone. I sat in the third row during the ceremony, behind Jessica's extended family and college friends, watching my son marry a woman who looked at me as if I was a problem to be managed rather than a person to be loved. After the wedding, Marcus and Jessica moved into a beautiful 2-story house in Willowbrook Estates, a gated community about 20 minutes from my neighborhood. The house had 5 bedrooms, a 3-car garage, and a pool in the backyard. It was everything I had ever dreamed of being able to provide for Marcus, and I was genuinely happy that he had achieved such success. But with their new life came new distance. My weekly dinners with Marcus became monthly visits, and even those felt strained and obligatory. When Emma was born 2 years after the wedding, I thought everything might change. Surely becoming a grandmother would restore some connection, some reason for me to be included in their lives. I had so much love to give, so many stories to share, so many traditions I wanted to pass down. I knitted blankets, bought toys, and prepared the spare bedroom in my house as a nursery for when they would visit. But those visits never came. Instead, I was allowed supervised visits at their house, usually for an hour or 2 on Sunday afternoons, always with Jessica present and always with the feeling that I was being watched and evaluated. When Tyler was born 18 months later, the pattern continued. I would arrive at their house with homemade cookies or small gifts, spend a brief time playing with the children, and then receive subtle but clear signals that it was time to leave. Jessica would mention their dinner plans, or Marcus would check his phone and announce he had work to catch up on. I began to feel like a stranger visiting someone else's family rather than a grandmother spending time with her own grandchildren. The children were beautiful and bright, but I could see Jessica's influence in the way they were being raised. Emma spoke with a slight accent that sounded more like Jessica's private school diction than the natural speech patterns of a child from our neighborhood. Tyler was enrolled in expensive preschool programs and music lessons that cost more per month than I used to spend on groceries. They were being shaped into little versions of Jessica's world, and I was increasingly irrelevant to that process. I tried to find ways to connect, to be useful, to prove my worth. I offered to babysit when they wanted to go out, but Jessica always had a regular nanny who knew the children's routines better than I did. I suggested family dinners at my house, but they were always too busy with social obligations and Marcus's work commitments. I attempted to plan birthday parties and holiday celebrations, but Jessica had already organized elaborate events that made my simple ideas seem inadequate and out of touch. Ruth Hernandez, my next-door neighbor and closest friend, watched this slow erosion of my relationship with Marcus with growing concern. Ruth had been through her own struggles with difficult in-laws and understood the delicate balance of trying to maintain family connections without overstepping boundaries. She would often find me in my garden, tending to my flowers with tears in my eyes, and she would sit with me on the porch swing, offering comfort and perspective. "Diana, Mija, you raised a good man," Ruth would say. "These things have a way of working themselves out. Don't give up on him." But as the months passed, I began to wonder if Ruth's optimism was misplaced. Marcus seemed to be drifting further away from me, and Jessica's influence over him appeared to be growing stronger. I started to feel like I was fighting a losing battle against someone who had more resources, more connections, and more influence than I could ever hope to match. The breaking point came on a sunny Saturday morning in March. I had been looking forward to Emma's 8th birthday party for weeks, had bought her a beautiful dress and wrapped it carefully with a handmade card expressing how proud I was of the young lady she was becoming. I arrived at their house 15 minutes early, as I always did, hoping to help with last-minute preparations and maybe steal a few extra moments with my granddaughter before the other guests arrived. Jessica answered the door, but instead of her usual polite smile, her face was cold and determined. She stepped outside and closed the door behind her, blocking my view of the house and the sounds of party preparations inside. "Diana, we need to talk," she said in a voice that immediately made my stomach tighten with anxiety. "Of course, sweetheart," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is everything okay? Do you need help with anything for the party?" Jessica looked at me with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of frustration and finality that made me feel like I was about to receive news that would change everything. "There's not going to be a party for you today, Diana. Marcus and I have been discussing this for weeks, and we've decided that we need some space. Some time to focus on our family without outside interference." The words hit me like a physical blow. Outside interference? Jessica, I'm Emma's grandmother. I'm family. "Your family, yes, but you're also becoming a problem," she said, her voice getting stronger and more confident. "You don't understand boundaries, Diana. You call too much. You show up uninvited. You question our parenting decisions. And you make the children feel confused about where they belong. Emma came home from your house last month, asking why Grandma's house is so different from ours. Why you don't have the same things we have. Do you understand how that makes us feel?" I felt my heart breaking in real time. I was just trying to show her different ways of living, different values. I wanted her to understand that happiness doesn't come from material things. "But that's exactly what I'm talking about," Jessica continued, her voice rising slightly. "You undermine our choices, our lifestyle, our values. You make subtle comments about how we spend our money, how we raise our children, how we live our lives. Marcus works incredibly hard to provide for his family, and you make him feel guilty about his success." "I have never made Marcus feel guilty about anything," I said, my voice shaking with emotion. "I'm proud of everything he's accomplished. I'm proud of the man he's become." "Are you?" Jessica challenged. "Because every time you talk about his childhood, every time you tell stories about how much you sacrificed, every time you make those little comments about how different things are now, you're essentially telling him that his current life is somehow wrong or shallow. You're making him choose between his past and his future, between his mother and his wife." The accusation felt so unfair, so completely opposite to everything I thought I had been doing, that I could barely find words to respond. "Jessica, I love Marcus more than anything in this world. I love you and the children. I just want to be part of their lives." "But you can't be part of their lives the way you want to be," she said, her tone becoming more matter-of-fact. "You can't accept that things have changed, that Marcus has grown up and moved on. You want him to be the little boy who needed you for everything, but he's not that person anymore. He's a man with his own family, his own priorities, his own life." I could feel tears starting to form in my eyes, but I was determined not to let her see me cry. "So what are you saying? That I can't see my grandchildren anymore? That I can't be part of their lives?" "I'm saying that you're not welcome here anymore, Diana. Marcus and I have discussed it, and we think it's best if you give us some space, some time to figure out how to have a healthy relationship with appropriate boundaries. Right now, your presence is causing more stress than joy, and that's not fair to anyone, especially the children." The words felt like a door slamming shut on everything I had built my life around. "Does Marcus know you're telling me this? Does he agree with this decision?" Jessica's pause was brief but telling. "Marcus supports our decision to prioritize our family's well-being. He's inside getting ready for the party, and he asked me to handle this conversation because he knew it would be difficult." I realized that my son didn't even have the courage to face me himself, to tell me directly that I was no longer welcome in his life. He had sent his wife to deliver the message that would cut me out of his world, out of my grandchildren's lives, out of everything that had given my life meaning for the past 8 years. "I'd like to speak to Marcus myself," I said, trying to maintain whatever dignity I had left. "Not today, Diana. Not like this. Maybe in a few weeks, when everyone has had time to process, but not today." I stood there on their doorstep, holding Emma's birthday gift, listening to the sounds of laughter and celebration from inside the house, and realized that I was no longer part of any of it. The family I had sacrificed everything to build, the son I had raised with such love and dedication, the grandchildren I adored more than life itself, had decided they were better off without me. I set the gift down on their doorstep and walked back to my car, somehow managing to keep my composure until I was safely inside with the doors closed. Then I sat in their driveway and cried harder than I had cried since the day Marcus's father left us. But these tears were different. These tears came from a deeper place, from the realization that the most important relationship in my life had been severed by someone who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. When I finally drove home, Ruth was waiting for me on my front porch, as if she had sensed that something terrible had happened. She took one look at my face and wrapped me in her arms, letting me cry against her shoulder while she stroked my hair and whispered words of comfort. "Mija, tell me what happened. Tell me everything." I told her about the conversation with Jessica, about being banned from the birthday party, about feeling like I had lost my son and grandchildren in one devastating moment. Ruth listened without interrupting, her face growing more troubled with each detail. "Diana, this is not right," she said when I finished. "A mother should not be cut off from her child like this. There's something else going on here, something deeper than just boundaries and space. Jessica is trying to erase you from their lives, and Marcus is letting her do it." "But what can I do?" I asked. "I can't force them to include me. I can't make Marcus choose me over his wife. I can't compete with Jessica's world, her money, her connections, her ability to give them everything I never could." Ruth was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked at me with a determination I had rarely seen in her gentle eyes. "Diana, you're going to do what you've always done. You're going to be strong, you're going to be patient, and you're going to be ready for when they need you. Because they will need you, Mija. People like Jessica, people who build their lives on appearances and money and control, they always crash eventually. And when they do, they always come running back to the people who really love them." "But what if they don't?" I asked. "What if this is it? What if I never see Emma and Tyler again? What if Marcus really believes that I'm just a problem to be solved?" "Then you'll build a new life," Ruth said firmly. "You'll find new ways to be happy, new people to love, new purposes to pursue. But I don't think it will come to that. I think Jessica has made a mistake, and eventually, Marcus will see it too." That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the conversation with Jessica, analyzing every word, every tone, every implication. I thought about all the times I had bitten my tongue when I disagreed with their parenting choices, all the times I had smiled and nodded when Jessica made comments about my house, or my cooking, or my simple way of life. I thought about all the ways I had tried to fit into their world, to be the kind of grandmother they wanted me to be, and how none of it had been enough. But as the hours passed and dawn began to creep through my bedroom windows, I began to feel something else alongside the pain and rejection. I began to feel a quiet anger, a growing sense of injustice, that someone who had known my son for less than 5 years could decide that I, who had loved him for 32 years, was no longer worthy of being in his life. I began to think about all the things I knew about Marcus that Jessica didn't, all the ways I understood him that she couldn't, all the history we shared that she could never erase. And somewhere in that anger I found a resolve I hadn't felt in years. I would not disappear quietly. I would not fade into the background and accept that my role in my son's life was over. I would wait, and I would watch, and I would be ready for whatever came next. Because Ruth was right about one thing. People who build their lives on appearances and control and money always crash eventually. And when Jessica's perfect world started to crumble, I would be there to help pick up the pieces. Little did I know that I wouldn't have to wait very long. 3 weeks had passed since Jessica's devastating words on their doorstep, and I was slowly learning to navigate a world where my son and grandchildren no longer existed in my daily life. The silence was deafening. No more Sunday afternoon visits, no more phone calls from Marcus asking for advice about the children, no more impromptu drop-ins when Emma had a school project and needed help. My house felt like a museum of memories, filled with photographs and mementos of a family that had moved on without me. I had tried calling Marcus twice in the first week, but both calls went straight to voicemail. I left careful, measured messages expressing my love and asking when we could talk, but he never called back. Ruth suggested I might try texting, something more casual and less confrontational, but even my simple messages asking how the children were doing remained unanswered. It was as if I had been completely erased from their lives, as if 32 years of being Marcus's mother had been canceled by one conversation with his wife. The hardest part was the routine disruption. For years, I had structured my weeks around their schedules, planning my grocery shopping around Sunday dinners with Marcus, timing my garden work so I could wave at the children when Jessica picked them up from school. Now my days stretched endlessly, filled with small tasks that felt meaningless without the larger purpose of being useful to my family. I found myself driving past Emma's school at dismissal time, hoping to catch a glimpse of her walking to Jessica's car. But the school had implemented new security measures that kept parents and guardians in designated areas away from the general pickup zone. I would sit in my car across the street, watching other grandparents hug their grandchildren and help carry backpacks, and feel a physical ache in my chest that never seemed to fade. Ruth had been my lifeline during those first terrible weeks. She would appear at my door with fresh coffee and homemade pastries, forcing me to eat and engage with the world outside my own grief. She had a way of listening without offering false comfort, of acknowledging the reality of my loss without trying to minimize it or rush me toward acceptance. "You know what I think?" Ruth said one morning as we sat on my back porch, watching the sunrise paint my garden in shades of gold and pink. "I think Jessica is scared of you." I looked at her with surprise. "Scared of me? Ruth, I'm a 72-year-old woman who can barely figure out how to use her smartphone. What could I possibly do that would frighten someone like Jessica?" "You represent everything she's trying to make Marcus forget," Ruth explained, stirring sugar into her coffee. "You're his past, his authenticity, his connection to who he was before he became successful. She's trying to reinvent him as someone who belongs in her world, and you're a constant reminder that he comes from somewhere else." "But I've never tried to pull him away from his new life," I protested. "I've always been supportive of his success, proud of everything he's accomplished." "I know that, Mija, and deep down Marcus knows it too. But Jessica doesn't see it that way. She sees you as competition for his loyalty, his attention, his identity. She's afraid that if you're too present in their lives, Marcus might remember that there are other ways to be happy, other values besides money and status." Ruth's words stayed with me throughout the day, and I found myself thinking about all the subtle ways Jessica had tried to distance Marcus from his roots over the years. The way she would redirect conversations whenever I mentioned his childhood, the way she would schedule important events on days when she knew I couldn't attend, the way she would praise Marcus for being so different from his upbringing, as if overcoming his past was an achievement to be celebrated. I began to wonder if Jessica's rejection of me was part of a larger plan to reshape Marcus's entire identity, to create a version of him that fit more seamlessly into her privileged world. Maybe she had been working toward this moment for years, gradually convincing him that his connection to me was holding him back from reaching his full potential in their social circle. The thought made me angry in a way I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. I had always tried to be understanding about Jessica's background, to recognize that her upbringing had been different from mine, and that she might not understand the importance of extended family relationships. But now I was beginning to see her behavior as deliberate and calculating, a systematic effort to isolate Marcus from anyone who might remind him of who he used to be. That anger gave me energy I hadn't felt in weeks. I started paying closer attention to the world around me, noticing things I had missed during my period of grief and self-pity. I subscribed to the local newspaper and began reading the business section, something I had never done before. I wanted to understand Marcus's world better, to know what was happening in the financial industry that employed him. What I discovered was troubling. The headlines were full of stories about economic uncertainty, corporate restructuring, and investment firms struggling to maintain profitability in an increasingly volatile market. Morrison Financial Group, Marcus's employer, had been mentioned in several articles about companies facing significant challenges due to changing market conditions and increased regulatory scrutiny. I started researching the company online, reading their annual reports and press releases, trying to understand their business model and how secure Marcus's position might be. What I found was a company that had grown rapidly during the economic boom of the past decade, but was now facing serious questions about its long-term viability. They had invested heavily in high-risk ventures that were no longer generating the returns they had projected, and several of their major clients had moved their accounts to more conservative firms. The more I read, the more concerned I became. Marcus had built his entire identity around his success at Morrison Financial, and Jessica's lifestyle depended on his substantial salary and bonuses. If the company was struggling as much as the articles suggested, their perfect life might be more fragile than anyone realized. I mentioned my concerns to Ruth during one of our morning coffee sessions. "I'm probably overreacting," I said, "but some of these articles make it sound like Marcus's company is in real trouble. I keep thinking about how much they spend on that house, the cars, the children's private schools. What would happen if Marcus lost his job?" Ruth frowned as she considered my question. "Diana, people like Jessica always assume their lifestyle is permanent. They make financial decisions based on current income without considering that circumstances can change. If Marcus's job disappeared tomorrow, I don't think they have the kind of savings or backup plans that would sustain them for very long." "But surely Marcus is smart enough to prepare for something like that," I said. "He's always been good with money, even as a child. He saved his allowance. He worked part-time jobs in high school. He understood the value of financial security." "That was before he met Jessica," Ruth pointed out. "That was before he started trying to keep up with her family's lifestyle, before he started spending money to prove he belonged in their world. Sometimes smart people make foolish decisions when they're trying to impress someone they love." Ruth's observation made me think about all the changes I had witnessed in Marcus over the past few years. The expensive cars, the designer clothes, the elaborate vacations, the constant talk about investments and acquisitions and business opportunities. He had always been ambitious, but his ambition used to be focused on security and stability. Now it seemed focused on status and appearances, on proving that he was worthy of Jessica's world. I wondered if Marcus had lost sight of the financial principles I had taught him as a child, the importance of living within your means, and saving for emergencies. Had Jessica's influence convinced him that those values were outdated, that successful people didn't need to worry about such mundane concerns? My research into Morrison Financial became a daily habit. I would spend hours reading industry publications, following financial news, trying to understand the complex web of investments and partnerships that kept the company afloat. I wasn't entirely sure what I was looking for, but I felt compelled to stay informed about the forces that might affect my son's future. Then, on a Tuesday morning in late April, I found the article that changed everything. It was buried on page 6 of the financial section, just a few paragraphs about Morrison Financial facing a federal investigation into their handling of client funds. The article was brief and technical, but the implications were staggering. The company was being accused of misrepresenting investment risks to their clients and using questionable accounting practices to hide their losses. My hands shook as I read the article 3 times, trying to fully grasp what it meant. If the accusations were true, Morrison Financial could face massive fines, criminal charges, and almost certain bankruptcy. Their employees would lose their jobs, their clients would lose their investments, and the company's reputation would be destroyed. I immediately called Ruth, reading the article to her over the phone. "Diana, this sounds very serious," she said when I finished. "If Marcus's company is under federal investigation, his job is probably in jeopardy. Have you heard anything from him? Any indication that he knows what's happening?" "Nothing," I replied. "He hasn't spoken to me in over a month." "But Ruth, if this is as bad as it sounds, he's going to need help. Financial help, emotional support, maybe even legal advice. Jessica's family might be able to weather this kind of storm, but Marcus has never dealt with anything like this before. Are you thinking about reaching out to him?" Ruth asked carefully. I considered her question. Part of me wanted to call Marcus immediately, to offer my support and whatever resources I could provide. But another part of me remembered Jessica's words about boundaries and space, about not being welcome in their lives. What if I reached out and they rejected my help as just another example of my unwillingness to respect their independence? "I don't know," I admitted. "I want to help, but I'm afraid they'll see it as me trying to interfere again. Jessica made it very clear that I'm not welcome in their lives, and I don't want to make things worse by inserting myself into their problems." "Diana, this is different," Ruth said firmly. "This isn't about birthday parties or family dinners. This is about Marcus potentially losing his job, his income, his ability to support his family. In a crisis like this, people need all the help they can get, regardless of previous disagreements. Ruth was right, but I still felt uncertain about how to proceed. I decided to wait and see what developed, to continue monitoring the situation, and be prepared to act if Marcus reached out to me. I couldn't force him to accept my help, but I could make sure I was ready to provide it if he asked. Over the next few days, more articles appeared about Morrison Financial's troubles. The investigation was expanding to include several other investment firms, and there were rumors that criminal charges might be filed against some of the company's executives. The stock price was plummeting, and industry analysts were predicting that the company would either declare bankruptcy or be acquired by a larger firm at a fraction of its former value. I found myself checking my phone constantly, hoping for some word from Marcus, some indication that he was aware of what was happening and had a plan to deal with it. But my phone remained silent, and I began to wonder if he was simply in denial about the severity of the situation, or if Jessica was preventing him from reaching out to me. Then, on a Friday evening, as I was preparing a simple dinner for myself, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Marcus's name, and my heart started racing. I hadn't heard his voice in over a month, and I had no idea what to expect. "Hello, Marcus," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mom." His voice sounded tired, strained, older than I remembered. "I know it's been a while since we talked, and I know things have been difficult between us, but I need to ask you something." "Of course, sweetheart. What do you need?" There was a long pause, and I could hear him taking a deep breath. "I need to know if you've been following the news about Morrison Financial. I need to know if you understand what's happening." "I've been reading about the investigation," I said carefully. "I know the company is facing some serious challenges." "It's more than challenges, Mom. It's a complete disaster. The federal investigation is expanding every day, and it looks like they're going to shut us down completely. I'm going to lose my job, and there's a good chance I could be personally liable for some of the company's actions." The pain in his voice was unmistakable, and I felt my heart breaking for him. "Marcus, I'm so sorry. I know how much your career means to you, how hard you've worked to build your position there." "That's not even the worst part," he continued. "The worst part is that I don't think we can survive this, financially. We've been living on my salary and bonuses, and we don't have the kind of savings that would get us through an extended period of unemployment. Jessica's been talking about asking her parents for help, but I don't know if they'll be willing to support us indefinitely." I could hear the desperation in his voice, the fear of someone who had built his entire identity around financial success, and was now facing the possibility of losing everything. "Marcus, you know I'll help however I can. I don't have much, but whatever I have is yours." "That's why I'm calling," he said quietly. "I know we haven't been on the best terms lately, and I know Jessica said some things that hurt you. But I need to know if you meant what you just said. I need to know if you're really willing to help us, even after everything that's happened. Marcus, you're my son. Nothing that's happened between us changes that. Nothing Jessica said or did changes that. If you need help, I'll do whatever I can to provide it." I heard him let out a shaky breath, and I realized he had been holding back tears. "Thank you, Mom. I don't know what we're going to do, but knowing that you're there means everything to me." "Have you told Jessica that you're calling me?" I asked. Another pause. "Not yet. She's been so stressed about everything, and I didn't want to add to her anxiety by bringing up family complications. But I think she's starting to realize that we're going to need all the help we can get. Marcus, I want you to know that I don't hold any grudges about what happened. I understand that you were trying to protect your family, and I respect that. But I also want you to know that I never stopped loving you or wanting to be part of your life." "I know, Mom. I think I've known that all along. But I got caught up in trying to be the person I thought I needed to be. I lost sight of what really matters, and now I'm paying the price for it." We talked for another 20 minutes, and I could hear some of the tension leaving his voice as we spoke. He told me more about the investigation, about the meetings with lawyers and accountants, about the growing realization that his career at Morrison Financial was over. He also told me about Emma and Tyler, about how they were asking questions about why Grandma Diana never came to visit anymore, about how difficult it was to explain adult conflicts to children who just wanted their family to be together. "I miss you, Mom," he said as our conversation was winding down. "I miss having you in our lives, and I think the kids miss you too. I don't know how to fix everything that's gone wrong, but I want to try. We'll figure it out together, I assured him. Whatever happens with your job, whatever challenges you're facing, we'll handle them as a family. That's what families do. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, processing everything Marcus had told me. The situation was even worse than I had imagined from reading the news articles. Not only was he going to lose his job, but he might face personal financial liability for the company's actions. The lifestyle he and Jessica had built was about to collapse, and they were completely unprepared for that reality. But underneath my concern for their practical problems, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Marcus had reached out to me, had acknowledged that he needed my help, had expressed regret about the distance that had grown between us. Maybe Ruth had been right when she said that people always come back to those who really love them when their perfect world starts to crumble. I called Ruth immediately to share the news about Marcus's call. She listened with growing excitement as I described our conversation, and when I finished, she was practically bouncing with enthusiasm. "Diana, this is it," she said. "This is your chance to rebuild your relationship with Marcus and show Jessica that you're not the problem she thought you were. This is your opportunity to be the mother and grandmother you've always wanted to be." "I don't want to seem like I'm taking advantage of their misfortune," I said. "I don't want them to think I'm happy about their problems." "You're not taking advantage, Mija. You're being a mother. You're doing what mothers do when their children are in trouble. You're offering help and support and love, regardless of what's happened in the past." Ruth was right, and I knew it. This wasn't about vindication or proving a point. This was about my son and his family facing a crisis, and about me being there for them in whatever way I could. The details of our past conflicts seemed insignificant compared to the challenges they were about to face. I spent the weekend preparing for whatever role I might need to play in helping Marcus and his family navigate the coming storm. I organized my financial records, researched unemployment benefits and job placement services, and began thinking about practical ways I could support them through what was likely to be a very difficult transition. But most importantly, I prepared myself emotionally to be the mother Marcus needed me to be, regardless of how Jessica might react to my renewed presence in their lives. I had spent too many years trying to fit into their world, trying to be the grandmother they wanted me to be. Now it was time to simply be myself, to offer the kind of unconditional love and support that had sustained our family through every previous crisis. The phone call from Marcus had been the catalyst I had been waiting for without even knowing it. Their perfect world was beginning to crumble, and for the first time in months I felt like I had a purpose again. Not as an unwelcome intrusion in their lives, but as the person who would be there when everything else fell apart. On Monday morning, I woke up with more energy and determination than I had felt since before Jessica's devastating words on their doorstep. I had a feeling that very soon, I would discover just how much the family who had discarded me actually needed the woman they had so easily dismissed. The week that followed Marcus's phone call was filled with a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. I found myself checking the news constantly, following every development in the Morrison financial investigation, trying to understand how each new revelation might affect my son's situation. The story was becoming bigger by the day, with federal prosecutors announcing that they were expanding their investigation to include potential criminal charges against several executives. Marcus called me twice more that week, brief conversations where he updated me on the latest developments and asked for my advice about practical matters like unemployment benefits and health insurance. I could hear the stress in his voice growing with each call, and I could sense that he was struggling to maintain his composure in front of Jessica and the children. "Mom, I don't know how to tell the kids that we might have to move," he said during our Wednesday evening conversation. "Emma keeps asking why I seem so worried all the time, and Tyler heard Jessica crying on the phone with her mother yesterday. I don't know how to explain something like this to children their age." "Marcus, children are more resilient than you think," I told him. "They can handle difficult news if it's presented to them honestly and with love. What they can't handle is sensing that their parents are keeping secrets from them or that their family is falling apart." "But what if we do have to move? What if we can't afford the house payments anymore? What if I can't find another job that pays enough to maintain their lifestyle?" Emma is supposed to start 4th grade at Willowbrook Academy in the fall, and Tyler just made friends in his preschool class. How do I tell them that everything they've known is about to change? I could hear the desperation in his voice. the fear of a father who had built his identity around being a provider and was now facing the possibility of not being able to provide for his family. Marcus, your children don't love you because of the house you live in or the school they attend. They love you because you're their father, because you've always been there for them, because you've shown them what it means to be a good person. Those things don't change regardless of your financial situation. But Jessica's been so upset about everything, he continued. She keeps talking about how her friends are going to react, how embarrassing it will be if we have to downsize, how the children will be traumatized by changing schools. She's been on the phone with her parents constantly, and I can tell they're not happy about the situation. And what do Jessica's parents think should happen? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. They're willing to help us temporarily, Marcus said, his voice getting quieter. They've offered to let us move in with them until I can find another job, and they've said they'll continue paying for the children's private school. But they want us to sell the house and most of our possessions, and they want me to take whatever job I can find, even if it pays significantly less than what I was making at Morrison. And how do you feel about that arrangement? I asked. Honestly, I feel like I'd be trading one form of dependence for another. I'd be giving up any control over my family's future and putting Jessica's parents in charge of all our major decisions. I'd be admitting that I can't take care of my own family, that I need her father to rescue me from my mistakes. I could hear the pride and frustration in his voice, and I understood exactly what he was feeling. Marcus had worked his entire adult life to establish his independence and prove his worth, and now he was facing the possibility of becoming financially dependent on people who had never fully accepted him as an equal. Marcus, there are other options, I said carefully. You don't have to choose between financial ruin and complete dependence on Jessica's family. There are ways to get through this that would allow you to maintain your dignity and your independence. What do you mean? He asked, and I could hear genuine hope in his voice for the first time in our conversation. I mean that you have family who loves you and wants to help, family who doesn't come with conditions or expectations about what kind of person you should be. I mean that you don't have to face this alone, and you don't have to sacrifice your independence to get the help you need. There was a long pause, and I could almost hear him thinking, weighing his options, considering possibilities he might not have fully explored before. Mom, I don't want to impose on you. I know you don't have the kind of resources that Jessica's family has, and I don't want to burden you with problems that aren't your responsibility. Marcus, helping my son and his family is never a burden. It's a privilege. And you might be surprised by what resources I do have available. I've been living simply for a long time, and I've been saving money precisely for situations like this, for times when my family might need help. But even if you could help us financially, what about Jessica? What about her reaction to accepting help from you after everything that's happened? She's been so resistant to involving you in our lives, and now she'd have to depend on you for support. Marcus, people's perspectives change when they're facing a crisis, I said. Jessica's primary concern right now is protecting her family and maintaining some stability for her children. If I can help provide that stability, I think she might be more open to my involvement than you expect. I don't know, Mom. I want to believe that, but Jessica has been so stressed about everything, and she's been very clear about wanting to handle this situation through her own family. I'm not sure she's ready to accept help from someone she's been trying to keep at a distance. Then maybe it's time for me to have a conversation with Jessica directly, I said, surprising myself with the suggestion. Maybe it's time for us to talk openly about what's happening and how we can all work together to help your family get through this. You would do that? Marcus asked, his voice filled with surprise and what sounded like relief. You would be willing to reach out to Jessica after everything that's happened? Marcus, I would do anything for you and your family. I've never stopped caring about Jessica, even when she made it clear that she didn't want me in your lives. She's the mother of my grandchildren, and she's the woman you love. If there's a way for us to work together to help your family, I'm willing to try. We talked for a few more minutes, and by the end of the conversation, Marcus had agreed to ask Jessica if she would be willing to meet with me to discuss their situation. I could tell he was nervous about her reaction, but I could also sense that he was hopeful about the possibility of finding a solution that didn't require him to sacrifice his independence or his relationship with me. After we hung up, I sat in my living room thinking about the conversation and what it might mean for our family's future. I was nervous about the prospect of facing Jessica directly, especially given how our last interaction had ended. But I was also excited about the possibility of rebuilding our relationship and finding a way to support Marcus and the children through this difficult time. I called Ruth to tell her about my conversation with Marcus and my plan to reach out to Jessica. She was enthusiastic about the idea, though she also warned me to be prepared for a difficult conversation. "Diana, Jessica is probably feeling very vulnerable right now," Ruth said. "Her entire world is being threatened, and she's going to be defensive and possibly hostile. You'll need to be very careful about how you approach her, very gentle and non-confrontational." "I know," I replied. "I'm not looking to prove any points or settle old scores. I just want to help my family get through this crisis, and that means finding a way to work with Jessica rather than against her. Just remember that she's probably embarrassed about needing help from someone she rejected," Ruth continued. "She's going to be struggling with her pride, just like Marcus is. You'll need to find a way to offer your help that doesn't make her feel like she's losing face or admitting she was wrong." Ruth's advice was sound, and I spent the next day thinking about how to approach Jessica in a way that would be constructive rather than confrontational. I wanted to focus on our shared love for Marcus and the children, on our common goal of helping the family navigate this crisis successfully. On Thursday evening, Marcus called to tell me that Jessica had agreed to meet with me on Saturday afternoon. She had been reluctant at first, he said, but had finally agreed when he explained that I might be able to offer practical help that wouldn't require them to move in with her parents. "She wants to meet at a neutral location," Marcus explained. "She suggested the coffee shop at the Barnes & Noble on River Street. She said she'd prefer to have this conversation somewhere private but not too personal." I agreed to the location and the time, and spent the next 2 days preparing for what I knew would be one of the most important conversations of my life. I wasn't just meeting with Jessica to discuss their financial crisis. I was potentially rebuilding a relationship that had been damaged by months of misunderstanding and hurt feelings. On Saturday morning, I dressed carefully in a simple but neat outfit, something that would convey respect for the seriousness of our meeting without appearing too formal or intimidating. I arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early, chose a quiet table in the back corner, and ordered a cup of tea while I waited for Jessica to arrive. When she walked through the door, I was struck by how different she looked from the confident, polished woman I remembered from our previous interactions. She appeared tired and stressed, her usual perfect hair slightly disheveled, her designer clothes wrinkled as if she had been wearing them for several days. But more than her appearance, it was her demeanor that had changed. The assured superiority I had always sensed in her presence was gone, replaced by something that looked very much like fear. She spotted me immediately and walked over to the table, her expression cautious but not hostile. "Hello, Diana," she said, as she sat down across from me. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." "Thank you for being willing to have this conversation, Jessica," I replied. "I know things have been difficult between us, but I hope we can find a way to work together to help Marcus and the children." She nodded, ordering a coffee from the server who had approached our table. For a moment, we sat in awkward silence, both of us apparently uncertain about how to begin this conversation that had the potential to change everything. Finally, Jessica spoke. "Diana, I want you to know that I'm aware of how I treated you before, and I'm aware that I said some things that were probably unfair. I was trying to protect my family in the way I thought was best, but I realize now that I may have made some mistakes." Her words surprised me with their directness and apparent sincerity. I had expected defensiveness or continued hostility, not an acknowledgement of past conflicts and an implicit apology for her behavior. "Jessica, I appreciate you saying that," I replied. "I know we've had our differences, but I've never stopped caring about you and the children. You're Marcus's wife and the mother of my grandchildren, and that makes you family to me, regardless of what's happened between us." She seemed to relax slightly at my response, her shoulders dropping as some of the tension left her body. "Marcus told me that you're willing to help us through this situation, and I have to admit that I'm grateful for the offer. I don't know what we're going to do, and I don't know how we're going to get through this without help from someone. I want to help in whatever way I can," I said. "I don't have unlimited resources, but I have some savings, and I have a house that's been paid off for years. More importantly, I have time and energy to devote to helping your family get back on your feet." Jessica looked at me with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of gratitude and something that might have been shame. "Diana, I need to be honest with you about something. When I told you that you weren't welcome in our lives anymore, I thought I was protecting my family from complications and interference, but I think I was really protecting myself from feeling inadequate, from being compared to someone who had a deeper history with Marcus than I did. Her admission was more honest than I had expected, and I felt my heart soften toward her in a way it hadn't in years. Jessica, I never wanted to compete with you for Marcus's attention or affection. I just wanted to be part of your family, to be a grandmother to Emma and Tyler, to support all of you in whatever way I could. I know that now, she said, her voice getting quieter. And I know that I let my own insecurities and pride get in the way of what was best for my family. I've been so focused on maintaining appearances and proving that we didn't need anyone else that I forgot what really matters. We talked for over an hour, and by the end of our conversation, something fundamental had shifted between us. Jessica told me about her fears for the children's future, her concerns about Marcus's emotional state, her anxiety about having to depend on her parents for support. I shared my own concerns about the family's situation and my ideas for how we might work together to help them through this crisis. By the time we left the coffee shop, we had developed the outline of a plan that would allow Marcus and his family to maintain their independence while receiving the support they needed to get through this difficult transition. It wasn't going to be easy, and it would require all of us to make compromises and adjustments. But for the first time in months, I felt like we were all working toward the same goal: protecting and supporting the family we all loved. As I drove home from our meeting, I reflected on how dramatically things had changed in just a few weeks. A month ago, I had been banned from my son's life, cut off from my grandchildren, dismissed as an unwelcome intrusion in their perfect world. Now I was being invited back into their lives not as an obligation or a burden, but as a source of strength and support when they needed it most. Ruth had been right when she said that people always come back to those who really love them when their perfect world starts to crumble. But what she hadn't prepared me for was how good it would feel to be needed again, to have a purpose again, to be part of my family's future, rather than just a reminder of their past. The crisis that had threatened to destroy Marcus's family was also creating an opportunity for all of us to rebuild our relationships on a foundation of honesty, mutual respect, and genuine love. And as I pulled into my driveway, I realized that I was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead, because I was finally back where I belonged, at the center of my family's life, ready to help them face whatever came next. The following Monday morning brought news that would change everything for Marcus and his family. I was in my kitchen preparing breakfast when my phone rang, and Marcus's name appeared on the screen. Even before I answered, I could sense the urgency in the repeated rings. "Mom, it's over," he said without preamble, his voice hollow and defeated. Morrison Financial announced this morning that they're shutting down operations immediately. All employees are being terminated effective today, and there's going to be a complete liquidation of assets to pay creditors and legal fees. I sank into my kitchen chair, feeling the weight of this news settle over me like a heavy blanket. We had known this was coming, but the reality of it was still shocking. "Marcus, I'm so sorry. I know how much you are hoping they might find a way to survive this. It gets worse, Mom. They're not just shutting down the company. The federal prosecutors announced that they're filing criminal charges against 12 employees, including 3 people from my department. They're saying that anyone who handled client accounts during the past 2 years could be subject to investigation." My heart clenched with fear for my son. "Marcus, does that mean you're in legal trouble? Could you be charged with something?" "I don't know yet," he admitted, his voice shaking slightly. "My lawyer says it depends on what the prosecutors can prove about individual knowledge of the fraudulent activities. Since I wasn't in senior management, I might be okay, but there's no guarantee. I could be facing months of legal uncertainty, and even if I'm not charged, the association with Morrison Financial is going to make it almost impossible to find another job in the industry." The implications of what he was telling me were staggering. Not only was Marcus unemployed, but he might also be facing criminal charges and professional blacklisting. The career he had built over the past decade was not just interrupted, it was potentially destroyed. "Have you told Jessica?" I asked. I called her right after I got the news. She's been crying on and off all morning, and she's already called her parents. They want us to come over tonight to discuss what happens next, but I think I already know what they're going to say. I could hear the resignation in his voice, the sound of a man who felt like he was out of options. Marcus, remember what we talked about. You don't have to accept the first solution that's offered to you. There are other ways to handle this situation. I know, Mom, but I'm not sure I have much choice. Jessica's parents are offering us a place to stay and financial support until I can get back on my feet. They're willing to help us keep the children in their current schools and maintain some stability in their lives. It might be the best option we have. Or it might be the option that costs you the most in the long run, I said gently. Marcus, before you make any decisions, I want you to consider what Jessica and I discussed on Saturday. I want you to think about whether there might be a way to get through this that doesn't require you to give up your independence. There was a long pause, and I could almost hear him thinking, weighing his options, considering possibilities he might not have fully explored. Mom, I appreciate everything you're willing to do for us, but I'm not sure it's realistic. My legal fees alone are going to be enormous, and we have no income to cover our basic expenses. Jessica's parents have the resources to help us immediately, and I don't know if we can afford to wait for other solutions. Marcus, I want you to come over tonight. Bring Jessica and the children. Let's have dinner together and talk about this as a family. I have some ideas that might surprise you, and I think it's important for all of us to explore every option before making a decision that could affect your family for years to come. Are you sure, Mom? I don't want to impose on you, especially with everything that's happening. Marcus, you're not imposing. You're my son, and this is what families do for each other. Come over at 6 o'clock. I'll make dinner, and we'll figure out a way through this together. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen for several minutes, processing the magnitude of what had just happened. Marcus wasn't just unemployed. He was potentially facing criminal charges that could destroy his career permanently. Jessica's perfect world hadn't just cracked. It had completely shattered. The family that had rejected me as unnecessary was now facing a crisis that would test every relationship and every assumption they had about their lives. I called Ruth immediately, needing to share the news with someone who would understand the full implications of what was happening. Diana, this is terrible, Ruth said when I finished explaining the situation. That poor boy must be terrified, and Jessica must be beside herself with worry about what this means for their future. They're coming over for dinner tonight, I told her. Jessica's parents want them to move in and accept complete financial support, but I think there might be better options. I just need to figure out how to present them in a way that doesn't sound like I'm trying to compete with her family's offer. What are you thinking? Ruth asked. I'm thinking that Marcus needs more than just financial support. He needs a way to rebuild his career and his confidence. He needs to feel like he's contributing to his family's recovery, not just being rescued by someone else. If he moves in with Jessica's parents, he'll be completely dependent on them for everything, and that's not going to help him get back on his feet. And what can you offer that's different? I had been thinking about this question since my conversation with Jessica on Saturday, and I had developed some ideas that I thought might work. I can offer them stability without dependence. I can help them maintain their dignity while they figure out their next steps. And I can give them something Jessica's parents can't: unconditional love and support, without judgment or expectations. Ruth was quiet for a moment, considering what I had said. Diana, are you sure you're ready for this? Taking on responsibility for your son's entire family during a crisis like this is going to be emotionally and financially demanding. Are you prepared for what that might mean? Ruth, I've been preparing for this my entire life, I said with more confidence than I had felt in months. I raised Marcus as a single mother through much worse circumstances than this. I know how to stretch a dollar, how to make tough decisions, how to keep a family together when everything seems to be falling apart. This is what I do. This is who I am. And what about Jessica? Is she really ready to accept help from you after everything that's happened? I think Jessica is ready to accept help from anyone who can provide it without making her feel like a failure, I replied. She's scared, Ruth. She's facing the possibility of losing everything she's worked to build, and she's probably feeling like she has no control over her family's future. If I can offer her a way to regain some of that control, I think she'll be willing to work with me. I spent the rest of the day preparing for what I knew would be one of the most important dinners of my life. I went to the grocery store and bought ingredients for Marcus's favorite meal from childhood. Not the fancy pot roast I had made for him and Jessica years ago, but the simple, comfort food that had sustained us through difficult times when he was young. I cleaned the house thoroughly, set the table with my everyday dishes rather than the fancy ones I had used to try to impress Jessica, and prepared myself emotionally for a conversation that would determine the future of our family relationships. At exactly 6 o'clock, I heard car doors slamming in my driveway. I looked out the window and saw Marcus helping Emma and Tyler out of the back seat, while Jessica gathered what looked like overnight bags from the trunk. My heart jumped with hope and anxiety as I realized they weren't just coming for dinner, they were coming to stay. I opened the front door before they could knock, and Emma immediately ran toward me with her arms outstretched. "Grandma Diana!" she shouted, hugging me around the waist with the enthusiasm of a child who had missed someone dearly. Tyler followed close behind, wrapping his small arms around my legs and looking up at me with a smile that melted my heart. "I've missed you both so much," I said, kneeling down to hug them properly. "I'm so glad you're here." Marcus approached more slowly, his face showing the strain of the day's events but also something that looked like relief. "Mom, thank you for inviting us over. I know this is all very sudden, but Jessica's parents want us to make a decision tonight about moving in with them, and I wanted to talk to you first." "Of course," I said, looking past him to Jessica, who was standing slightly behind the children with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Jessica, I'm glad you're here. I know this has been a difficult day for all of you." "Thank you for having us, Diana," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "I hope we're not imposing on you. You're not imposing. You're family, and this is your home, whenever you need it to be." I led them into the living room, where I had prepared some simple snacks and drinks for the children. Emma and Tyler immediately began exploring the house, rediscovering toys and books I had saved from their previous visits, while Marcus and Jessica sat together on the couch, looking like people who had been through an ordeal. "Marcus told me what happened today," I said, settling into my chair across from them. "I'm so sorry about the company closing and the uncertainty about the legal situation. I know this isn't what you were hoping for." "It's worse than we imagined," Jessica said, her voice tight with stress. "Marcus's lawyer says the investigation could go on for months, and even if he's not charged, the association with Morrison Financial is going to make it almost impossible for him to find another job in the financial industry. We don't know what we're going to do. Have you considered that this might be an opportunity to explore other options?" I asked carefully. "Marcus, you have skills and experience that would be valuable in many different industries. This might be a chance to find something that's more fulfilling than what you were doing before." Marcus looked at me with surprise. "Mom, I appreciate the optimism, but I don't think you understand how serious this situation is. We have mortgage payments, car payments, insurance, the children's school tuition. I can't afford to explore new career options. I need to find a way to make money immediately." "I understand that you have immediate financial obligations," I said. "But I also think you might have more options than you realize. Before you make any decisions about moving in with Jessica's parents, I want you to consider an alternative arrangement." Jessica and Marcus exchanged glances, and I could see both hope and skepticism in their expressions. "What kind of alternative arrangement?" Jessica asked. "I want you to move in here with me, temporarily, while Marcus figures out his next career move. I want to help you maintain your independence while providing the support you need to get back on your feet." The silence that followed my suggestion was profound. Marcus stared at me with an expression of complete shock, while Jessica looked like she was trying to process what I had just offered. "Mom, we can't ask you to do that," Marcus said finally. "You're 72 years old. You don't need the disruption of having 4 additional people living in your house, and we don't need charity from anyone. It's not charity, Marcus. It's family helping family. And I'm not as frail as you seem to think I am. I raised you in this house, and I can certainly help you raise Emma and Tyler here." "But what about our house?" Jessica asked. "What about our mortgage payments and all of our possessions?" "We can figure out a way to handle the house," I said. "Maybe you can rent it out to cover the mortgage payments. Or maybe you can negotiate with the bank for a modification. The important thing is that you don't have to make desperate decisions under pressure." "Diana, this is incredibly generous of you," Jessica said, her voice showing genuine emotion for the first time since they had arrived. "But I don't think you understand what you're offering. Emma and Tyler are used to having their own rooms, their own space. They're used to a certain lifestyle that we might not be able to maintain. Jessica, children are much more adaptable than adults think they are, I replied. What they need is stability, love, and security. They need to know that their family is going to be okay, that their parents are going to figure out a way through this crisis. They don't need fancy bedrooms or expensive toys. They need their family to be together. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him considering my offer seriously. Mom, even if we accepted your generous offer, what about the practical issues? What about my legal fees? What about our debt? What about the fact that I have no income and no prospects for immediate employment? Marcus, I have some savings that I've been accumulating for years, I said. I've been living simply and putting money aside for exactly this kind of situation. I can help you with the legal fees and the immediate expenses while you figure out your next move. But how much could you possibly have saved? Jessica asked, not rudely but with genuine curiosity. Diana, we appreciate your willingness to help, but our monthly expenses are substantial. We're not talking about a few $100s here and there. I had anticipated this question, and I had prepared for it by gathering all of my financial documents the night before. Jessica, I think you might be surprised by what I've been able to save over the years. I've been working and saving for 40 years, and I've never had expensive tastes or habits. I own this house outright, I have a good pension, and I have investments that have been growing for decades. I went to my desk and pulled out a folder containing my financial statements, bank records, and investment summaries. I had never shared this information with anyone, not even Marcus, because I had always believed that my financial situation was private. But now, with my family facing a crisis, I was willing to be completely transparent about my resources. I have approximately $250,000 in savings and investments, I said, watching their faces as they processed this information. I have a pension that provides me with more than enough income to cover my living expenses, and I have this house, which is worth approximately $400,000 in today's market. Both Marcus and Jessica stared at me with expressions of complete shock. I could see them recalculating everything they thought they knew about my financial situation, everything they had assumed about my ability to help them. Mom, I had no idea, Marcus said quietly. I thought you were just getting by on your pension and Social Security. I thought you were barely making ends meet. I've never been one to discuss my finances, I said. I've always believed that money should be saved for emergencies, for times when it's really needed. This is one of those times. Diana, this changes everything, Jessica said, her voice filled with wonder and what sounded like gratitude. You could really help us get through this crisis without having to depend on my parents. More than that, I said, warming to my subject. I can help you in ways that your parents can't. I can provide you with a stable home environment without the emotional complications of dependence. I can help you maintain your dignity while you figure out your next steps. And I can give Emma and Tyler the kind of unconditional love and support that comes from family. We spent the next 2 hours discussing the practical details of what this arrangement might look like. I showed them the spare bedrooms where they could stay, explained how we could modify the house to accommodate their needs, and outlined a plan for sharing expenses and responsibilities. Marcus would focus on dealing with his legal situation and exploring new career opportunities, while Jessica could take time to process everything that had happened and figure out her own next steps. What about Emma and Tyler's school situation? Jessica asked. Willowbrook Academy is very expensive, and I don't know if we can afford to keep them there. Jessica, there are excellent public schools in this district, I said. Emma and Tyler are smart, adaptable children. They'll do well wherever they go to school, and they might actually benefit from a more diverse environment. But what about their friends? What about their activities? They're going to feel like their whole world has been turned upside down. Their whole world has been turned upside down, I said gently. The question is whether we're going to help them adjust to that reality in a healthy way, or whether we're going to try to pretend that nothing has changed. Children are remarkably resilient when they feel loved and supported. By the end of the evening, we had developed a comprehensive plan for how the family could move in with me temporarily, while Marcus dealt with his legal situation and looked for new employment opportunities. Jessica had been initially skeptical, but as we discussed the details, I could see her beginning to embrace the idea of having support that didn't come with the emotional complications of dependence on her parents. Diana, I want to be honest with you about something, Jessica said as we were finishing our discussion. When I told you that you weren't welcome in our lives anymore, I was scared. I was scared that you would take Marcus away from me, that you would show Emma and Tyler a different way of living that would make them dissatisfied with what we could provide. I was scared that you would judge our choices and find us lacking. Jessica, I was never trying to take Marcus away from you, I said. I was trying to be part of your family, to support you and love you the way family members should. I never wanted to compete with you or make you feel inadequate. I know that now, she said, her voice full of emotion. And I know that I made a terrible mistake when I pushed you away. I was so focused on protecting what I thought was mine that I forgot that families are supposed to grow and include more love, not less. Marcus had been quiet during this exchange, but now he spoke up. Mom, I owe you an apology. I should have never let Jessica cut you out of our lives. I should have stood up for you and insisted that we find a way to work through our differences. I was a coward and I'm sorry. Marcus, you were trying to keep your family together, I said. You were trying to be a good husband and father. I understand why you made the choices you did, even if I didn't agree with them. But I chose the wrong way to keep the family together, he said. I chose to exclude the person who had always been there for me, who had always supported me, who had always loved me unconditionally. I chose to prioritize keeping peace with Jessica over maintaining my relationship with you, and that was wrong. Marcus, we can't change what happened in the past, I said. But we can choose how we move forward from here. We can choose to be a family that supports each other through difficult times, that faces challenges together rather than allowing them to drive us apart. That night, as I prepared bedrooms for Marcus and his family, I reflected on how dramatically things had changed in just a few weeks. A month ago, I had been a rejected grandmother, cut off from my son's life and banned from seeing my grandchildren. Now I was about to become the center of their support system, the person they turned to for stability and guidance during the most difficult period of their lives. I wasn't naive about the challenges that lay ahead. Having 4 additional people living in my house was going to require significant adjustments for all of us. Marcus was going to need time to process the trauma of losing his career and potentially facing criminal charges. Jessica was going to need to adjust to a simpler lifestyle and learn to accept help graciously. Emma and Tyler were going to need support as they adapted to new schools and new routines. But as I tucked fresh sheets onto the beds and prepared my home to welcome my family, I felt a sense of purpose and fulfillment that I hadn't experienced in years. I wasn't just providing temporary shelter for people in crisis. I was helping to rebuild the family relationships that had been damaged by pride, misunderstanding, and fear. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of children's laughter in my kitchen, to the smell of coffee brewing and breakfast being prepared, to the wonderful chaos of a house filled with family. Marcus was sitting at my kitchen table, helping Tyler with a puzzle, while Jessica was braiding Emma's hair and talking to her about their plans for the day. "Good morning, Grandma Diana," Emma said when she saw me, running over to give me a hug. "Mommy says we're going to live with you for a while. Is that okay?" "Emma, that's more than okay," I said, hugging her back. "That's wonderful. I've missed having you and Tyler around." "Are you going to teach us how to garden?" Tyler asked, looking up from his puzzle. "Daddy says you have the best tomatoes in the neighborhood." "I would love to teach you how to garden," I said, laughing at his enthusiasm. "We can start a special section just for you and Emma." As I looked around my kitchen, filled with the sounds and sights of family life, I realized that Ruth had been right when she said that people always come back to those who really love them when their perfect world starts to crumble. But what she hadn't prepared me for was how good it would feel to be needed again, to have my house filled with purpose and love, to be part of my family's future, rather than just a reminder of their past. The crisis that had threatened to destroy Marcus's family was also creating an opportunity for all of us to rebuild our relationships on a foundation of honesty, mutual support, and genuine love. And as I poured myself a cup of coffee and joined my family at the breakfast table, I realized that I was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead, because I was finally back where I belonged, at the center of my family's life, ready to help them face whatever came next. The confrontation I had been dreading came 3 days after Marcus and his family moved in with me. I was in the garden with Emma and Tyler, showing them how to plant marigold seeds, when a sleek black Mercedes pulled into my driveway. Through the tinted windows, I could see the rigid posture of Harold Palmer, Jessica's father, and the perfectly coiffed silhouette of her mother, Victoria. "Grandma Diana, who are those people?" Emma asked, looking up from the small hole she had been digging with her plastic spoon. "Those are your other grandparents, sweetheart," I said, brushing dirt from my hands and trying to keep my voice calm. "Why don't you and Tyler go inside and wash up for lunch?" I had known this moment would come eventually. Jessica's parents had been calling constantly since Marcus's family moved in with me, leaving increasingly urgent messages about the need to discuss the family's situation properly. When Jessica finally returned one of their calls yesterday, the conversation had been tense and brief, ending with Harold demanding to meet with me directly. Harold Palmer stepped out of the driver's seat, his expensive suit looking absurdly formal for a suburban driveway visit. He was a tall man with silver hair, and the kind of commanding, equals presence that came from decades of being the most important person in any room. Victoria emerged from the passenger side, her designer outfit and perfect makeup making her look like she was attending a charity luncheon rather than visiting her daughter's temporary living situation. "Mrs. Martinez," Harold said, approaching me with the kind of measured stride that suggested he was used to making dramatic entrances. "I believe we need to have a conversation about my daughter and her family." "Mr. Palmer, Mrs. Palmer," I replied, wiping my hands on my gardening apron. "I'm sure Jessica told you that she and Marcus are staying here temporarily while they figure out their next steps." "That's exactly what we need to discuss," Victoria said, her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to having her opinions treated as facts. "Diana, may I call you Diana? We appreciate your willingness to help during this difficult time, but we think there are better arrangements that would be more appropriate for everyone involved." I gestured toward my front porch, where I had arranged some comfortable chairs for exactly this kind of conversation. "Please, sit down. Would you like some iced tea or coffee?" "That won't be necessary," Harold said, settling into one of my chairs with the air of someone who was about to conduct a business meeting. "We don't intend to take up much of your time." Victoria arranged herself in the chair next to her husband, her back straight, and her hands folded in her lap. "Diana, we want you to understand that we're not here to criticize your generosity or your desire to help your son. We're here because we're concerned about what's best for Jessica and the children." "I'm concerned about what's best for them too," I said, taking a seat across from them. "That's why I offered to help when they needed it most." "But you see, that's precisely the problem," Harold said, leaning forward slightly. "Your help, while well-intentioned, is actually preventing Marcus and Jessica from making the difficult but necessary decisions that will secure their long-term future." I felt my stomach tighten with apprehension. "What kind of decisions are you referring to?" "Marcus needs to accept responsibility for his situation and take whatever employment he can find, even if it means a significant reduction in income," Harold explained. "He needs to understand that his days of high-salary positions are probably over, and he needs to adjust his expectations accordingly. And Jessica needs to understand that her lifestyle is going to change dramatically," Victoria added. "She needs to start making practical decisions about the children's education, their living arrangements, and their future prospects." I could feel anger beginning to build in my chest, but I tried to keep my voice level. "Mr. Palmer, with respect, I think Marcus and Jessica are perfectly capable of making their own decisions about their future. They don't need anyone to force them into accepting circumstances that might not be in their best interest." Harold's expression hardened. "Mrs. Martinez, I don't think you understand the severity of Marcus's situation. He's facing potential criminal charges. He's been blacklisted from the financial industry. And he has no realistic prospects for employment at anything approaching his previous salary level. The sooner he accepts that reality, the sooner he can start rebuilding his life. And the sooner Jessica accepts that her previous lifestyle is gone forever, the sooner she can start adjusting to more modest circumstances," Victoria continued. "By allowing them to live here, by providing them with financial support, you're enabling them to avoid facing the truth about their situation. The truth about their situation is that they're facing a temporary crisis that they can overcome with the right support and time," I said, my voice getting stronger. "They don't need to be forced into desperation decisions because someone else thinks they should suffer for their mistakes." Mrs. Martinez, Harold said, his voice taking on a patronizing tone that made my teeth clench. I appreciate your optimism, but I think you're being naive about the realities of the situation. Marcus has destroyed his career through his association with Morrison Financial. No reputable firm is going to hire him, and the legal costs alone are going to bankrupt him. The kindest thing you can do is help him accept that reality rather than encouraging false hope. And what would you have him do instead? I asked. Give up completely? Accept whatever menial job he can find? Move his family in with you and become completely dependent on your charity? Victoria's lips tightened into a thin line. Diana, our offer to help is not charity, it's family supporting family during a difficult time. But our support comes with the understanding that Marcus needs to make fundamental changes in his approach to life and work. What kind of changes? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. He needs to accept a position with one of Harold's business associates, Victoria explained. It's not glamorous work, and it doesn't pay nearly what he was making before, but it's honest employment that will allow him to support his family at a modest level. And he needs to accept that his previous lifestyle was unsustainable, Harold added. He needs to sell his house, get rid of his expensive cars, and learn to live within much more limited means. I stared at them both, trying to process what they were suggesting. You want Marcus to give up any hope of rebuilding his career and accept a life of permanent financial dependence on you. We want Marcus to accept reality, Harold said firmly. We want him to stop chasing fantasies about returning to his previous success and start focusing on providing basic stability for his family. And we want Jessica to stop indulging in unrealistic expectations about maintaining her previous lifestyle, Victoria added. She needs to understand that her priorities have to change, that she needs to focus on being a practical wife and mother rather than trying to maintain appearances. The condescension in their voices was infuriating, but what made me even angrier was the underlying message about Marcus's worth and potential. They were essentially writing him off as a failure, declaring that his mistake at Morrison Financial had permanently disqualified him from any meaningful success. Mr. and Mrs. Palmer, I said, standing up from my chair, I think you're wrong about Marcus and Jessica. I think you're underestimating their resilience, their intelligence, and their ability to rebuild their lives on their own terms. Diana, you're being emotional rather than practical, Victoria said, her voice taking on a sharp edge. You're allowing your feelings as a mother to cloud your judgment about what's really best for this family. What's best for this family is support that empowers them rather than support that diminishes them, I replied. What's best for this family is time to recover from this crisis and explore all their options, not pressure to accept the first solution that's offered to them. Harold stood up, his expression becoming more severe. Mrs. Martinez, I think you're making a mistake. I think you're encouraging Marcus and Jessica to cling to unrealistic hopes that are going to lead to even greater disappointment down the road. And I think you're trying to use this crisis to control their lives in ways that have nothing to do with their actual needs, I said, my voice rising slightly. I think you're more interested in proving that Marcus can't succeed without your help than you are in actually helping him succeed. Victoria gasped at my directness, but Harold's expression became even more determined. Mrs. Martinez, you're being completely unreasonable. We're offering practical help with realistic expectations, and you're offering false hope that's going to hurt everyone involved. I'm offering unconditional support while they figure out their own path forward, I said. I'm offering them the dignity of making their own choices about their future. Dignity doesn't pay bills, Harold said coldly. Dignity doesn't put food on the table or send children to school. Marcus needs to accept that his time of financial success is over and start focusing on basic survival. Marcus is 32 years old, I said, my voice getting stronger. He's intelligent, educated, and hardworking. This crisis doesn't define him or limit his potential for the rest of his life. This crisis has destroyed his reputation and his career prospects, Victoria said. The sooner he accepts that, the sooner he can start building a more realistic life. At that moment, I heard the front door open behind me, and I turned to see Marcus and Jessica stepping onto the porch. Marcus looked tired and stressed, but Jessica's expression was a mixture of embarrassment and anger that I had never seen before. Mother, Dad, Jessica said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. I didn't expect to see you here. Jessica, we came to talk to Diana about your living situation, Victoria said, her voice softening slightly. We're concerned that you're making decisions based on emotion rather than practical considerations. We're concerned that you're being encouraged to maintain unrealistic expectations about your future, Harold added, looking directly at Marcus. Son, you need to face the reality of your situation and start making responsible decisions. Marcus's jaw tightened, and I could see him struggling to maintain his composure. Harold, I appreciate your concern, but Jessica and I are capable of making our own decisions about our family's future. Are you? Harold challenged. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're hiding from reality instead of dealing with it. You're living in your mother's house, spending her money, and avoiding the hard choices that need to be made. We're not hiding from anything, Jessica said, stepping closer to her husband. We're taking time to explore all our options and make thoughtful decisions about our future. Jessica, sweetheart, Victoria said, her voice taking on a pleading tone, you're not thinking clearly. You're letting your emotions override your practical judgment. You need to come home with us, bring the children, and let us help you build a stable life. A stable life on your terms, Jessica said, her voice getting stronger. A life where Marcus accepts whatever job you arrange for him, where we live according to your expectations, where we raise our children according to your values. Jessica, those aren't unreasonable expectations, Harold said. We're offering you security, stability, and a future that's actually achievable. You're offering us dependence, Marcus said, his voice carrying a strength I hadn't heard from him in weeks. You're offering us the chance to give up our independence and our dignity in exchange for your version of security. Marcus, dignity is a luxury you can't afford right now, Harold said harshly. You need to focus on providing for your family, not on maintaining your pride. Providing for my family doesn't require me to give up my self-respect, Marcus replied. It doesn't require me to accept that I'm a failure who can't succeed without your help. Victoria looked at Jessica with an expression of disappointment and frustration. Jessica, is this really what you want? Is this really the kind of life you want for your children? I want my children to see their father fight for his family instead of giving up, Jessica said, her voice filled with emotion. I want them to learn that setbacks don't define you, that you can overcome difficulties without sacrificing your values. And I want them to learn that family supports each other through difficult times, Marcus added, looking at me with gratitude. I want them to see that love doesn't come with conditions or expectations. Harold's expression became coldly angry. Fine. If that's your decision, then you're on your own. Don't come to us when this fantasy falls apart and you realize you need real help. Harold, please, Victoria said, putting her hand on her husband's arm. Don't say things you'll regret later. I won't regret being honest about the consequences of foolish decisions, Harold replied. Jessica, when you're ready to be realistic about your situation, you know where to find us. They turned to leave, but Victoria paused at the edge of the tiny porch. Diana, I hope you understand what you're doing. I hope you realize that you're encouraging them to make choices that are going to hurt them in the long run. Mrs. Palmer, I said, my voice calm but firm. I'm encouraging them to make choices that preserve their dignity and their independence. I'm supporting them while they figure out their own path forward, not forcing them to accept someone else's version of what their life should be. You're enabling them to avoid reality, Victoria said. And when reality finally catches up with them, you'll be partially responsible for the consequences. After they left, the four of us stood on the porch in silence for several minutes. I could see Marcus and Jessica processing what had just happened, the finality of their rejection of Harold and Victoria's offer. The reality that they were now completely on their own except for my support. I'm sorry you had to witness that, Jessica said finally, her voice shaking slightly. I'm sorry they spoke to you that way. Jessica, you don't need to apologize for your parents, I said. They're worried about you, and they're trying to help in the only way they know how. But that doesn't mean their way is the right way. They're not wrong about the challenges we're facing, Marcus said quietly. They're not wrong about how difficult it's going to be to rebuild our lives. No, they're not wrong about the challenges, I agreed. But they're wrong about your ability to overcome them. They're wrong about what you're capable of achieving if you're given the support and time you need. Jessica looked at me with an expression of wonder and gratitude. Diana, I don't think you understand what you're risking by supporting us. If my parents are right, if we can't rebuild our lives successfully, you could lose everything you've saved trying to help us. Jessica, the money I've saved has no value if I can't use it to help the people I love when they need it most, I said. I didn't save it so I could die with a large bank account. I saved it so I could provide security for my family when they face difficult times. But what if we fail? Marcus asked. What if the legal situation gets worse? What if I can't find meaningful employment? What if we end up dragging you down with us? Marcus, failure is only permanent if you stop trying, I said. As long as you're willing to keep fighting. As long as you're willing to explore every option and work toward rebuilding your life, then we're not failing. We're just facing a challenge that's going to take time and effort to overcome. That evening, as we sat around my kitchen table eating dinner, I could see that something fundamental had changed in Marcus and Jessica's demeanor. The confrontation with her parents had forced them to make a choice between accepting dependence and fighting for their independence, and they had chosen to fight. Mom, Marcus said as we were cleaning up after dinner, I want you to know that I understand what you're risking by supporting us. I understand that you're putting your own security on the line to help us, and I don't take that lightly. Marcus, I want you to understand something, I said, turning to face him directly. I'm not risking anything by supporting you. I'm investing in my family's future. I'm investing in your potential to overcome this crisis and build something even better than what you had before. But what if your parents are right? Jessica asked. What if the legal situation destroys any chance Marcus has of rebuilding his career? What if we're just delaying the inevitable? Then we'll face that reality when it comes, I said firmly. But we won't face it by giving up before we've explored every possibility. We won't face it by accepting someone else's limitations on what you're capable of achieving. Over the following weeks, I watched Marcus and Jessica begin to rebuild their confidence and their sense of purpose. Marcus met with multiple lawyers, explored various legal strategies, and began researching alternative career paths that might be available to him. Jessica started investigating options for the children's education and began thinking about ways she might contribute to the family's financial recovery. The legal situation was indeed serious, but Marcus's attorney was optimistic that they could demonstrate his limited involvement in the company's fraudulent activities. The investigation was ongoing, but there were indications that the prosecutors were focusing on senior management rather than individual account managers like Marcus. More importantly, I could see both Marcus and Jessica beginning to believe in their own ability to overcome this crisis. They were no longer talking about accepting whatever opportunities were offered to them. They were talking about creating opportunities that would allow them to rebuild their lives on their own terms. Emma and Tyler were thriving in their new school, making friends and adjusting to their new routine with the resilience that children often display during difficult times. They seemed to enjoy living in my house, helping with the garden and having their grandmother involved in their daily lives. The confrontation with Jessica's parents had been difficult, but it had also been necessary. It had forced everyone to clarify their values and their priorities, to choose between security with dependence and uncertainty with independence. And in making that choice, Marcus and Jessica had taken the first step toward rebuilding their lives in a way that preserved their dignity and their self-respect. As I watched my family work together to overcome the challenges they were facing, I realized that Ruth had been right about more than just Jessica's eventual need for my support. She had been right about the importance of standing firm in your values, about the power of unconditional love, and about the strength that comes from facing difficulties together rather than allowing them to drive you apart. The crisis that had brought my family to my doorstep was far from over, but I could see that we were all growing stronger because of it. And for the first time in months, I felt confident that we were going to emerge from this experience, not just intact, but better than we had been before. 8 months later, I stood in my kitchen watching Marcus pack his briefcase for his first day at his new job. He looked confident, purposeful, and completely different from the broken man who had called me that terrible day when Morrison Financial collapsed. The federal investigation had concluded with no charges filed against him, and after months of careful networking and strategic job searching. He had accepted a position as a financial advisor with a smaller, more ethical firm that specialized in helping middle-class families plan for their futures. "Are you nervous?" I asked, adjusting his tie the way I used to when he was a child getting ready for school. "Surprisingly, no," he said, his voice steady and calm. "I'm excited. This feels like a fresh start, like a chance to do the kind of work I always wanted to do, but never had the opportunity to pursue." Jessica appeared in the doorway, looking radiant in a simple blue dress. She had started working part-time at the local community center, coordinating programs for seniors, and the work had given her a sense of purpose and fulfillment that her previous life of charity events and social obligations had never provided. "The children are ready for school," she announced, then turned to me with a smile that had become genuine and warm over the past months. "Diana, I can't thank you enough for everything you've done for us. You saved our family in more ways than one." "You saved yourselves," I replied, meaning every word. "I just provided a safe place for you to figure out who you really wanted to be." Emma and Tyler burst into the kitchen, their backpacks bouncing as they ran to give me goodbye hugs. They had not only adapted to their new school, but had flourished there, making friends across different social backgrounds and discovering interests they had never been exposed to in their previous, more sheltered environment. "Grandma Diana, are you going to pick us up today?" Emma asked, her arms wrapped around my waist. "Of course, sweetheart. We'll work in the garden when you get home, and Tyler can show me how well his tomatoes are growing." After they left, I sat at my kitchen table with my morning coffee, reflecting on how much had changed since that devastating day when Jessica had told me I wasn't welcome in their lives anymore. The family that had once seen me as an obstacle to their success had discovered that I was actually the foundation they could build their recovery on. Marcus and Jessica had decided to stay in my house permanently, not out of necessity but out of choice. They had sold their expensive home and used the proceeds to pay off their debts and establish a solid financial foundation. Instead of returning to their previous lifestyle of appearances and status symbols, they had chosen to embrace a simpler way of living that prioritized family relationships and personal fulfillment over material possessions. The arrangement worked beautifully for everyone involved. Marcus and Jessica contributed to the household expenses and helped with maintenance and improvements, while I provided childcare and the kind of family stability that money couldn't buy. Emma and Tyler had the benefit of growing up in a multi-generational household where they learned values from both their parents and their grandmother. Ruth appeared at my back door, as she had every morning for the past 8 months, carrying fresh muffins and ready to share coffee and conversation. "How did Marcus seem this morning?" she asked, settling into her usual chair at my kitchen table. "Confident," I said, pouring her a cup of coffee, "ready for this new chapter. It's amazing how much he's grown during this experience." "And Jessica?" "Transformed," I said, without hesitation. "She's become the woman I always knew she could be, when she stopped trying to be someone else's version of perfect." Ruth smiled knowingly. "I told you they would come back to you when their perfect world fell apart. But I didn't predict that you would all build something better together. The crisis forced all of us to examine what really mattered," I reflected. Marcus discovered that his worth wasn't tied to his salary or his status. Jessica learned that happiness comes from authentic relationships rather than social appearances. And I learned that sometimes the best thing you can do for people you love is to let them struggle until they find their own strength. "What about Jessica's parents? Have they come around?" "Victoria calls occasionally," I said. "She's still disapproving of their choices, but she's starting to see how well the children are doing." Harold remains convinced that Marcus threw away his potential, but Jessica doesn't seem to care about his opinion anymore. "And you? Are you happy with how everything turned out?" I considered her question carefully. "Ruth, I'm happier than I've been in years. I have my family back, but more than that, I have a family that actually wants to be together. We're not just going through the motions of family obligations anymore. We're choosing to build a life together because we genuinely enjoy each other's company." That evening, we gathered around my dining table for dinner, as we had every night for the past 8 months. Emma was telling us about her science project, Tyler was demonstrating a new song he had learned in music class, and Marcus and Jessica were discussing their plans for the upcoming weekend. "Mom," Marcus said as we were clearing the table, I want you to know that this experience taught me something important. I spent so many years trying to prove that I was successful, trying to show everyone that I had exceeded their expectations, that I forgot to appreciate what I already had. And what was that? I asked. A mother who loved me unconditionally, he said simply. A family that would be there for me regardless of my circumstances. A foundation of values and relationships that couldn't be destroyed by financial setbacks or career failures. Jessica nodded in agreement. Diana, I owe you an apology for more than just the words I said that day. I owe you an apology for not recognizing the gift you were offering us all along. You weren't trying to interfere with our lives, you were trying to enrich them. And now? I asked. Now I understand that the best thing I can give my children is what you gave Marcus, Jessica said. Unconditional love, unwavering support, and the confidence that comes from knowing your family will always be there for you. Later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this point. Jessica's cruel words had been devastating at the time, but they had also been necessary. They had forced me to step back and examine my own behavior, to find my own strength and independence. When Marcus's crisis brought us back together, I was no longer the desperate grandmother trying to force my way into their lives. I was a confident woman with resources and wisdom to offer, someone who could provide support without demanding gratitude or recognition. The financial crisis that had destroyed Marcus's career and shattered Jessica's perfect world had ultimately been a blessing in disguise. It had stripped away all the superficial concerns and forced everyone to focus on what truly mattered. It had revealed the strength and resilience that existed within our family, and it had given us the opportunity to build something authentic and lasting. As I drifted off to sleep in my house filled with the sounds of family life, I reflected on how completely my world had changed. A year ago, I had been a lonely widow, rejected by my own son and cut off from my grandchildren. Now I was the matriarch of a thriving multi-generational household, surrounded by people who valued my presence and appreciated my contributions. The woman who had once been told she wasn't welcome had become the cornerstone of her family's recovery and renewal. And in helping them rebuild their lives, I had discovered a sense of purpose and fulfillment that I had never imagined possible. Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as the most painful rejections, and sometimes the people who dismiss you as irrelevant are the ones who need you most. Jessica's words had been meant to push me away, but they had ultimately brought us closer together than we had ever been before. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.